gone to silent, please.
Okay, I'll do that.
Thank you. That recording's so helpful. Honestly, I'm sorry I missed that last week, but somebody came to the door and I had to go.
All right.
So that's why I apologise, but I did catch up, thank goodness. Thank you.
Good. Okay, welcome everybody. And what I'm going to be talking today is the China question. I mean, it's such a big sort of question facing us when you come out of the pandemic. It's going to be something that we need to understand as much as we can in that sense. Let me just put up the screen to share and make it big enough. Yeah, here we are. Now, I think, I don't know if you heard the World Service this morning. There was the start of the week program called Rethink. I don't know whether on Radio 4.
Yes, no, I heard it. It's very good.
I thought it was excellent. And it's going to be a series. And I was surprised because it's along the same lines that our series is, in fact. We have been doing that for the past 10, 12 lectures, and they are starting to do it now. And I'll be very interested to sort of catch all of them. So I thought it would be of interest to you as well. Now, China is one of those countries which, to me, is quite crucial in the future because of its track record. We have seen that it can deliver on so many fronts which other countries have not been able to do. Although the political system of China is different to ours, yet it seems to be a type of system that in this situation that we have is certainly delivering. And in the circumstances that China has been faced with lots of poverty and really quite backwardness in many ways, has brought about such a great change that we should sort of reflect on that seriously to see how it is that and what it is that they have done. And in our last lecture, we looked at the league tables to see where they stand on some rather sort of big parameters of GDP and tourism and exports and so on. And today I'm just going to go through it very quickly, a few of them, just to look at China in the present day and see where they stand right now in terms of various other issues that I will be highlighting as we go along. And what is the answer that we have in terms of dealing with China? And I think that's a very crucial question because what it seems to be the case is that China is going to be regarded as a rival or maybe an enemy as well. And that's what I fear because in this power politics that gets played, the Cold War is what we are talking about again, maybe coming back, and rather severe sanctions being applied and all sorts of, nasty things, which is going to not only impact China if it does come about, but it's going to impact the whole world. So we have to tread very carefully how we deal with it. So let's just quickly see what we're going to be talking about today. Okay, I'm going to be showing a few, global standing league tables, as I mentioned, and you remember some of them that we saw in the last lecture. And these pertain to the GDP, exports, strategic, politics, all these types of areas. And also, we haven't recently talked about the domestic achievements that they have attained. And that is something that also needs to be highlighted. The type of infrastructure that they have, in fact, put in place, which is quite astonishing. I mean, in some cases, it's all done in the last 1 or 2 decades. And then you've got all these other areas as well. And then, of course, comms. We talked about 5G, remember? So briefly, that's where we are on the China situation. And what are the countermeasures that we can expect to be applied? And this is what I'm highlighting as well. One has been the classic traditional way of putting bases all around it, sending, aircraft carriers to various places. And then, of course, trying to find allies for your particular perspective. And then the type of tools you've got to be able to do that, which is also the tariffs and the sanctions, which is very much part and parcel of what's going on right now. And of course, the narrative of this BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, is the debt. I think a lot of poor countries have been told, that debt is going to be too much for you, keep well away. And then, of course, the countermeasures, of course, we saw in 5G. The governments are saying, don't take 5G because it's a backdoor to all your data and so on, which is false, actually. Then you've got this space. They're not part of the International Space Station, you may remember. They were excluded from it. It's Russia and all the other countries that are like USA are there. And then, of course, talk of sanctions is underway because of the Uyghur and then, of course, the Hong Kong. So we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail as we go along. So here we go. So this is the standing at the moment. This is, you remember, renewable energy. Energy is the criteria that the world will sort of fall down on in the future if they don't, sort that out, because it affects the climate and it affects life on Earth, basically. And in that, metric, you've got China as being the one who's leading, followed by USA and Brazil and Canada and India. And where are we? We are down here, United Kingdom. But then we are a small country, therefore we don't produce that much energy anyway. Our requirement is not that much. But for China being a very large country, the requirements are humongous. And therefore, if they go for renewables, it's a good idea. And how much of that is coming from wind? Yeah, you can see from here, so many. Because in the other one, I think they were also leading, but even in the wind energy production, they're quite ahead. Followed by, of course, United States and Germany. India. India, you remember, was started as being a competition for China in about 20 years ago, but it has fallen quite back, fallen back quite a bit. Okay, hydropower. Hydropower is again one of those clean energies, so we need to have lots of it. And China is, also producing enormous amounts of it through their projects, hydropower. See the way ahead here. This is going into terawatts, Of course, Brazil, because of the Amazon River, you can have those dams and produce hydroelectricity. Canada, of course, is also huge land. And Russia as well. USA a little, but not much. So here we are. We don't have any natural dams or anything like that here, so we're not in the league here at all. Yeah, okay, oil reserves again, Venezuela. And this is where China is sorely lacking. And you can see why it is pushing ahead on renewables. It makes sense for them to go in with a vast investment because they can't rely on oil, which is one, polluting, and the secondly, it takes weeks to bring oil from the Middle East to China. And one of the reasons why our Belt and Road Initiative, through Pakistan especially, is so important is because they can ferry the oil from Pakistan border there in Gwadar right up to Western China. So it saves them weeks of transport times, and strategically also it's a safe bet for them to have an alternate route. So this is where they're very weak, and that's why they're promoting their their renewables very much. Okay, in terms of the wealth, they are getting there. I mean, traditionally for the last 100 years, I think USA has been the leading country, of the world in terms of wealth, and but China is catching up quite sort of rapidly, you can see. And then, of course, we are not too far back here, which is quite interesting. So we have wealth, and that wealth we can see is probably remnants of our empire, actually, of the old days. So it could be that, because our technology is good, but we aren't able to commercialize it. You remember, even the Comet that was developed was taken over by Boeing, and we couldn't sort of go very much on the commercialization part. So ideas are here in UK, but the commercialization of those ideas are not there. That's why I think we have fallen down, or rather lagging behind there, behind Germany, for instance. Okay, gold. We can't escape gold, of course. Gold is always something that we sort to and talk about. Who's got what now? We said that China again has, I think, trillions of dollars worth of reserves there in gold. 1.3. It's 3 trillion. So they've got a humongous reserve, and reserves are good because it strengthens your currency somewhat, and people have confidence that if you invest in China or whatever, they are backed by gold. Even in the worst circumstances, you can get paid. So that is still, and also a lot of countries are keeping the gold there. It used to be the case that Fort Knox in USA used to keep everybody's gold, but now not so much. I think China is coming that way. I think our Bank of England keeps gold of other countries as well. I know that in Zurich, under the airport, Zurich airport, they've got tons and tons of gold that comes in from various countries and gets stored over there. Okay, topmost industrialized. Now, what we are talking about again is to see that what is China standing in these rather big sort of areas. And we are going through that league tables, just to remind you again. So industrialized countries, even in that sort of metric, we've got China, like the top, one of the top countries there. And then you've got the EU there, which is a conglomeration of about 27 countries, still a little bit behind in some ways. And then USA. So as industrialization goes, so China is still also very much in that sort of league there. Yeah, there's the GDP. This is the purchasing power parity. It simply means that because the currencies have different purchasing power in each country, this tries to equalize so that, if you buy 10 apples in one country, how much you have to pay. If you buy same 10 apples in another country, how much you have to pay. And then they sort of, try and line it up so that the things are not too out of what we call it, it's comparing apples with apples, let me put it that way. So here also they are way ahead in that sense. Okay, exports. Again, they're ahead in exports closely. And this is why the big battle is going on at the moment, because United States has a deficit. And of course, in terms of China, bilateral trade, they have a deficit, and China is very much ahead. I think the deficit is about 400-500 billion, and that's why Trump is talking about tariffs and so on. Where are we here? We're not sure. Oh, here we are. So we have a small country. I think we still have respectable exports here. behind Japan and France. I wonder where Germany is. I wonder why Germany is not there. Oh, Germany is there, of course. There we are. Quite far ahead of both Japan, France, and United Kingdom. So they are a pretty strong country. Okay, now this is the area that's going to be impacted enormously. So we'll see, because we're talking about China. China is sending out a lot of tourists all over the world. And if this pandemic is going to, change people's minds about the hospitality, industry, how it's going to cope, we'll have to see here, because China it's quite a big destination as well, apart from sending people over to Europe, which is all these countries here. They themselves receive quite a few. Yeah, this again I think should be kept in mind. Who's the biggest thing? It's United States. It is 600 billion or even more now. So it's creating a humongous. In fact, if you look at the countermeasure, which we'll come down to later on, one of the countermeasure is to sort of have the strategic advantage and be able to use the traditional means of seeing might is right type of idea. China, because here, although the figures are here in dollars, but the purchasing power parity would probably put it quite high up there, I'm sure. So because, the same dollar goes a lot longer in China than in the United States. Now, Saudi Arabia, of course, it's a disgrace that they spend all that money on arms which are quite useless. This is the military in terms of number of people. India has the biggest one. Now, there's a bit of a battle going on Ladakh. I don't know whether you read about it in the papers. There was a lot of disputed area up on top of Kashmir, which is the source of a lot of these tributaries that start from that give water to the Indus. That's the source of the water for the Indus. Because if you block those, or if you control those sources, then the countries downstream have had it. So China has now taken over the disputed area. Half of it, it says, I think it's something of the order of about, I think it is 100,000 acres or even more. I'm not sure how much. But it certainly is a very strategic type of area that they have come into and said, this was something that was disputed, but we are occupying it now. And the other half will sit down and talk to India about it. So that's where the dialogue is at the moment. But China is asserting itself quite strongly, to the joy of Pakistan, of course, because it's their friend. And of course, India is both China's and Pakistan's enemy. Pakistan also has a pretty big military, you can see. So this plus China has a pretty big strength in that region, and India has beefed it up to 3 million, soldiers, but still I think that's spread out because the border from Ladakh in the north to Bangladesh on the other side is a pretty big border covering Nepal, and all those countries bordering that, they have disputes with India. Well, in terms of the cars here, I think this 2017, this is the ICE cars, the internal combustion engine, not the electric vehicles. So this is a dying technology. So I don't think China is there at all. Well, I don't know why it's not there, but it should be there somewhere. Oh, these are the makers, actually. These are not the countries, these are the brands. Toyota, Volkswagen, that's German, Hyundai, Korean, I think, GM, US, Japan, Italy. I don't think there's any car that is Chinese there. Okay, that's the summation of everything. GDP in 2018, still of the order of about 20 trillion, which is US. And then China is catching up fast. It's about 13 trillion. Japan, Germany, UK, in that order. So these are rich countries. Okay, well, this is a little bit more detailed, but again, comparing directly both the USA and China. Broadly speaking, we can very quickly look at it. This is the population of USA in blue, and this is the red and orange is China. So you can see the population relative sizes. And then we can also see the internet coverage. These figures give you the size of the picture itself gives you. And these are all the other ones which have to do with the imports. We saw earlier on that USA imports a lot from China. And China, of course, imports less from USA. That's why the deficit is there, the trade deficit. That's why we have trade war going on at the moment. And these are the other ones which have to do with technology, high-tech technology exports. Again, China is exporting a lot. Foreign direct investments, that's what they call FDI. That's when the other countries bring money into your own country for investment. So here it seems to be about the same, but still, I think China is ahead. China is also ahead in terms of this total reserves. We saw that. They've got plenty of gold as well in that. And this is the GDP. The USA is ahead in that. And here you've got the. So anyway, that's again a summarization. Okay, now we've talked about the league tables in terms of where China stands. And we see that China is doing quite well in a lot of areas, and we coming out of the pandemic world that we are all facing, they are positioned quite well because of all the league table positions that they have. And this is again another measure of saying technology innovation. Now, technology innovation is a good term because this is a product, if you like, of venture capitalists putting money in and coming out with new products. United States in Silicon Valley, as you've heard, they are pretty much leaders in that area globally. That's why they have a fairly high percentage there. Followed by China. China is also putting in, because one reason why China is sort of coming up, catching up, is because a lot of countries are finding that the Chinese graduates coming out of their colleges by the millions, they can get them to come and work in their own companies and do some research and so on. So innovation has also taken off in China. And of course, these are the other ones. India also, because they have good manpower. And then United Kingdom, 6, Japan, 6. So you can see these type of measures as to where China is positioned in terms of coming out. Okay, this China and US rivalry, we saw that little slide, I think, earlier on as well, somewhere in my earlier lectures. You see, there was a big deficit in the import and export. And that's the rivalry that has brought it about. Now, how did that happen? It happened because China started to connect to the West through these broadband, these internet. So a lot of, if you like, technology started to come into the country, and they started to get their products out into the global market. by having an advantage of not only the people power, people sort of wages, but also because of bringing in this technology. So with a combined thing, they were able to create a vast market of export, which then created this imbalance with USA, and that's why Trump is, very unhappy about that. Now, what has happened to the corporate world now? Corporate world is also, to a large extent, to be held into account because, we have said that before, the corporate world always looks at the bottom line and the interest of the shareholders. Therefore, they are going to go towards the lowest cost base that they can have for their manufacturing, which is China and now the rest of the other world outside of Europe and USA, where the costs are lower. Now, one of the things that we can also see the impact of this pandemic is we have started to use Zoom, and I've mentioned this before as well. People can work from home or from wherever they are, and companies are going to realize, they say, look, since a lot of work can be done by people sitting at home, let them stay at home and work. Maybe we can save some office space and so on. But the other sinister thing, or not sinister, but also a thing important, is that the companies are going to say, well, if you are able to do the work sitting at home, why not farm the work out to low-cost countries? Because you're going to be able to do the same thing what globalization did. So this is another type of globalization coming in after a pandemic. So we'll have to see whether the corporate world is going to be going that way. That's the bottom line I've told you about. And the corporate world, they're not worried too much about this social long-term responsibility. They think it's not their job. So what we have now is a tariff war underway. Now, strategic power is there, but it is the economic might that is going to make a lot more difference now. And that is what we are seeing. In China is becoming much more a power because they're able to spend more money on all the things that, like even space, for instance. They've got the rockets, they've landed a thing on the moon, on the other side of the moon. So they're going rapidly ahead on a lot of things. So economic are calling the shots. So no, the other thing is that because China has a different form of government, we are seeing that we have a longer term rather than the democratic 4 to 5 years that we normally have. And therefore, the long term in China, which is 10 years for each head of state, is 10 years, but now that has been made for Xi Jinping for his life. So it's going to be fairly long term. And this BRI is also long term. Okay, what are the countermeasures that we can expect that are happening? Well, basic thing is the bases in Iraq and Afghanistan and elsewhere. They still have something like 800 million bases, 800 military bases, sorry, in 70 countries. So you can see, I don't see what the point is, It's just making more arms to create wars or to create unrest so that people buy more arms and more security, whatever. So here is a very unproductive type of industry. Although in terms of research, a lot of money also goes into research so you can get better arms, but still on the whole, it's not as productive an industry as what the other industries could be if you spend the same amount of money. Britain, France, and Russia, they also have bases, but all of them have about 30 compared to this 800, which is amazing sort of, waste. Here they are, picture you can see, they're all over. And there's some numbers here, you see. There's 309 here in this spot here, that's all against Russia. 54 here, 55 here. 101 here in Korea. So you can see the enormous spread. And of course, it's going to be, I think, before long, put to pasture, I think. So let's see now. Geopolitics, yeah. Now, what are the responses that are coming in for organization-wise approach to dealing with the West from China's perspective? They're going in for equivalent type of bodies as well, like the SCO and the AIIB, which are the equivalent of NATO and of the World Bank. So they're creating their own sort of bodies to be able to safeguard their sort of strategies. And of course, the counter narrative is that there are some pretty smart cookies out here in the West who have created industries which are the leading, leaders in their fields. And we've talked about here, Tesla was named the top global technology visionary, ahead of Google's and of course Facebook, Alibaba, Microsoft, Larry Page, that's Google, Apple, so here you've got these people that are household names. They are still very much active in promoting industry and innovation. So this could be regarded as a counter argument for China, because China, although it's very good at manufacturing and being able to produce whatever the technology that has come in, which they have utilized for developing their own economies, the innovation is still very much, it's in the bag with in the West over here. Now, this is the equivalent of NATO, which China has put together. You remember, SCO, they have their meetings, and these two countries are in fact members of this. They're enemies, Pakistan and India, but yet in this forum, they are together, and that's the only forum that they can sit and talk and discuss. So China is promoting that, and China doesn't have a veto, which it's sort of ceded because they wanted to give, if you like, fair play to all the members. Now, AIIB, Asian Investment Infrastructure Bank, or Infrastructure Investment Bank. So that is equivalent to the World Bank. It's not as big as the World Bank, but still it has humongous amount of resources available. And they are developing mostly the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, you remember? And then they are into providing funds that are solely needed for all these countries, 86 of them. And fortunately, we are also part of that. So we are in Europe. Against the wishes of USA, I think this is what the AIB does. It sort of promotes in the poorer countries all these types of areas. And these have to do with infrastructure as well. Okay. US refuses to join this AIB and is urging allies also not to join. And of course, UK, France, Germany, Italy, South Korea joined the AIB against the wishes of USA. So that was a big blow to USA. And only Japan is in that side with USA. There we are. This is romancing UK here to the chagrin of this USA here. But I think my lady has said yes and gone that way. Okay. Okay, now how are we doing for time? Yeah, we've done about nearly an hour. So what I'll do is, rather than going into the detail, which is going to cover a lot of technical areas, just maybe this is the Financial Times saying that China's digital economy is a global trailblazer. So you can see the FT, a respectable sort of journal like that, is making statements, and the BBC. And the BBC here is saying why China's internet use have overtaken the West. So here again, respectable organs of media taking a view. Again, why it's going to be surging ahead is because of the immense investment it's making in technology and the infrastructure. And percentage of GDP is also quite high. So you can see the priorities they are putting in is more on the infrastructure and less on strategic assets, if you like. So this is going to pay dividends. And, okay, I'm not going to go into all this. Gives you a detailed thing as to how many internet users there are in China, which is humongous, nearly 860 million users. And because you have so many internet users, each one has a phone like us, and they're able to do all their transactions on that. The shopping, the banking, the booking of theater tickets, or catching a bus, ordering a taxi, whatever it is, making payments. So humongous amount of, commerce is being done by individuals using these smartphones. This is the penetration here. In China, it's already 60%, over 60%, and the other international users are less than 60%. This tells you the top 30 of the top 30 global internet capitalization, companies. You've got 7 of them are Chinese. These are the ones. So I won't go into all these because we've covered it in various sort of other lectures. And because our time is nearly up, I'm going to stop here and maybe just take questions now for the next 15 minutes. And we can discuss that. All right? I'm going to stop the share here. I'm going to unmute all of you. Okay, here we go. Okay, who has a question? Anybody has a question there?
I'm a bit concerned about this digital stuff because, as we were talking earlier, without any knowledge to me, I discovered that Google had put the app on my phone this morning, and I've asked everybody else that I know, and they've all had the app put on, and it's not just on my iPhone, it's on my tablet.
This is a Western tax system, is it?
Technology is a bit.
It was an update. It was an update. There was an iOS update.
Yeah, but it's actually on your phone. It says Canova virus.
Well, I haven't seen that myself. The government has not made it very clear as to, the Boris said he's got a world-class, world-beating system that we're all going to be using, and then he retracted after a week.
Dream one.
And then, of course, we are waiting to see how we are going to be, in fact, using these apps from Apple and Google so that we are able to say to the about our location and about our contact with other people. That hasn't been sort of told to us in any clear way, and we are still waiting to hear from them.
Well, just one observation I've got, Shafeeq, is we have very different attitudes to privacy in the West compared to China. And there is, as big data becomes more and more of the sort of commodity which is going to drive the economy, it's going to be interesting. China is it's not a democratic country. Yes, a lot of people have been taken out of poverty, over the last, couple of decades, but they're much more used to a surveillance state and to sacrificing privacy than we are. And I think it's going to be kind of interesting how we start to square that. I mean, we're already seeing this with coronavirus, the challenge of, okay, do we trust the government? If the government puts out testing, which was centralized data, which is being held centrally versus the decentralized model. So this issue about, our attitude to privacy, I think is going to actually be quite a major factor in terms of, digital expansion. And underpinning that, I do think also it comes to, if you are a democratic nation, trust in government and trust in institutions is going to be fundamental, which is one thing we certainly haven't got at present because our government hasn't earned it. But I just know, Winston, your sort of thoughts about that.
Yeah, you see, one thing that I heard this morning, which was very interesting, was this question of our personal data.
Yes, yeah.
Personal data is a real asset that the companies are utilizing without compensating us in any way and without taking our sort of permission. And they have grown enormously. Like if you look at Facebook and Google, they use our personal preferences, if you like, to gain advertisements for their businesses. And they've got enormous amounts of data that they have collected, which is really very, very valuable. And it can be used for various other purposes as well, which we saw that Cambridge Analytica was also sort of very much part of doing this Brexit game, follies that they did. I think it is going to be in the hands, this data is going to be in the hands of somebody. I think the best place it has to be is in our own hands. But I doubt whether we will get to that point, because although Europe has made it somehow a little bit more secure, it still means that these companies are bypassing various ways of trying to get our permission, and we just, because they put a little ad and then we click it, and otherwise it gets interferes with our sort of communication, and so anyway, that's a start. But you're absolutely right. If you're talking about personal privacy, it's very, very important for the societies which are advanced. Let me put it this way. For societies which are not that advanced, for them the priority is actually having food on the table. So that's where I think the difference lies. And China is still...
China is exploiting that. China is exploiting that.
Yeah, yeah.
Because of the fact that the poor countries are, because of the poor economy, the third world economies, and they are exploiting the fact that they have got the power to go and build up the infrastructure for them and loan them and put them more into debt. So gaining more and more power like that.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that narrative with Mushtaq, because I saw an interview of one of these Yugoslavian subsequent countries, or the Balkan countries, where some of them are absolutely poor, and China has come to build a highway there. And the interview was of the prime minister of that little country. And the question that was posed to them is, look, you don't have any money. How can you afford to build a highway? And his answer was quite clear. He says, look, if you don't have a highway, we can't sort of ferry our goods. So we have to take a risk, and we have to develop our markets, and therefore investment is required. And if China is going to put in the money and they've got the expertise to build it at a lower cost, then we'll go that way, and then we'll have an infrastructure that will help our economy. And infrastructure nowadays, we're coming out of the post-pandemic world, is going to be crucial even to UK. We saw that in HS2. Fortunately, it wasn't cancelled. And then we've got to develop our own broadband infrastructure as well, which we are still a long way from doing. So infrastructure investment, I think, is not necessarily a bad thing. unless you put in a big white elephant, you know, like the Colombo port in Sri Lanka, which had very little traffic anyway, and the Sri Lankans told the Chinese to make that port for them, and they couldn't get the revenues to pay back. So China said, okay, since you can't pay us the money, we'll take a lease on it and we'll run the port ourselves. So that's where the matter stands in trying to resolve the money issue and the debt issue.
Are you aware? I have a friend that's actually invested a lot of money in the pension funds, the Chinese pension funds. It didn't occur to me, but they are now having private pensions there.
Mm-hmm.
So, and these guys are investing all over the world. They're not investing in China. Yeah. They've been buying up cheap stock all over the world during this pandemic.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, when the market went down, you know, to below 20,000, I bought some shares as well. I mean, anybody who had a bit of loose cash in the bank, they bought it. And I think that's the free economy for you, free market, which is, but then there is some protection that you protect some vital and crucial industries that are not necessarily all the commercial ones. So people with money are able to buy, and that's why the world is slanted in a way towards the capitalistic strength.
But the Chinese not becoming capitalistic in their approach now. They're becoming westernized in their approach to how they make money.
They've got billionaires as well there, and quite a few of them. And that disparity is going to be clearly showing up, you know, before long. And it's already showing up as well. In fact, the cost base of China has started to move up because of this. And therefore, they're now sort of farming out the work to smaller countries around them. One of the beneficiaries has been Vietnam, for instance. You know, very low cost, good sort of workforce. And even Pakistan is sort of profiting from that.
Mushtaq, will you just put yourself onto silent? Because I can't hear what.
Yeah,
sorry.
Anyway, sorry, no, Shafeeq, I have to go. It's nearly 4 o'clock. So I'll see you. Yeah, okay, thanks. Thanks. Bye-bye. Bye.
Just ask something. Yeah, bye.
Oh, Maureen, good to see you. I didn't see you at all.
No, I've had all sorts of things going on. I've moved house and all sorts.
Oh, anyway, my goodness.
Oh, God. Anyway, what about the problem that the West technology companies are always complaining about, that China just steals their designs? They breach the copyright without too much worry about how illegal that is. I mean, that's one of the things. They tend to have a different attitude towards copyright design.
One of the reasons why China has surged ahead in what they're doing, which is to try and, you know, be an exporter country and a high-tech country and a low-cost sort of base, is they're riding on the piggyback of the innovations that were done in the West, and they have in fact used that technology, but they are still behind in innovation, because we saw in that little chart I showed you, USA is still the leading world power for innovation, which means they bring in new technologies, not utilizing just the standard technologies to improve businesses, but innovating the technologies themselves, which will be the standard type of technology for tomorrow. So the innovative aspects is something that the world has got to be careful about, that one doesn't lose that advantage. UK, Germany, USA, and all that, they're very much in that vulnerable area. If China spends more money on its people and the infrastructure that they're putting in, the 5G, for instance, they are going to sort of become the innovators of tomorrow. So the technology will then have to come the other way.
Yeah, but they don't seem to worry too much about stealing other people's designs and ideas, which is kind of tricky, isn't it? You know, how do you do business with an organization like China that doesn't play by the same rules of the game?
Well, this is the old game, Maureen.
But if every time you invent some brilliant thing and they just nick it off you, that's not going to work, is it? You know, you're going to have a war going on.
I could answer that one, maybe.
Say that again?
In a previous conversation today on the politics one on the University Third Age, it was noted by a Chinese lady that they are now running Harvard. Harvard University is basically run by the Chinese.
Okay.
Oh my God.
Unbelievable. It's unbelievable.
Now, the other thing I wanted to just mention was that, we talk about a democracy, right? Now, on the one hand, I didn't ask for this app to be put on my phone. I didn't know Google were doing this. I don't know anybody who knew Google. So when we talk about democracy, who's democracy? And the other thing I wanted to say was, what about the gulags in China? Is we seem to have forgotten about the human rights abuses that are going on there.
Yeah.
You know, in our rush to become, all things to all people, we've forgotten what's going on in China.
Well, we have to be a bit careful as to what actually we read as far as China is concerned, because don't forget, we are now sort of adopting an attitude of China being our rival and maybe a future enemy. And therefore, the slant that you get on the media is something that is obvious in some cases. And when you mention this case of Gulag and the Uyghurs, when I hear the Chinese as to what they're doing it in order, these people are in Western China. Western China is the poorest of the lot because Eastern China is where all the development and prosperity is. And this linkage of Western China with the rest of the neighboring countries, which are also very poor, which were the former stans of the Soviet Republic, they're all poor countries and also very religious as well in many ways. And Uyghurs are Muslim, and the Chinese explanation anyway is that they're trying to retrain them for a new workforce because the economy of the region is very, very sort of poor. And then it becomes a region where you can export the goods via this highway that has been built to connect to Pakistan, and Pakistani goods and industries, there's going to be back and forth trade happening. So they want to retrain that workforce over there. And to retrain that workforce is going to be like a camp. That's what they're saying, which is to make them, because they're very backward, they don't have much education. So it's a mass effort to try and alleviate the circumstances of these people. That's what they're saying. But how they're doing it is maybe that we're not all agreed that it's a very kosher way of doing it.
Well, people like to shop in Primark, and there's a reason why they can buy something for £1 in Primark, because it's made in these gulags. Everything comes from China now. Slave labor. I don't see any demonstrations in the streets about China.
Well, so long as we are
not us, but it's been conveniently forgotten. Like Guantanamo Bay has been forgotten.
Yeah, I went into a shop the other day to buy some peanuts, can you believe, with shells on them. And I saw on the pack, it says halal peanuts, I said, what's this? How can a peanut be a halal?
What?
Ethnically removed from the tree.
So I think this China, in their eagerness to export, they're going to stamp any old packet coming out of it to please any old person.
Brilliant.
Anyway, we have to be a bit careful. We have to learn a lot of things because, China is a real power that is emerging. And we'll have to sort of change our... George Osborne this morning on the program, I thought he made a point. He said we can't sort of rule out bringing China into the international fold because, isolating it and causing, it to be not part of the multipolar world or whatever we call ourselves. It's not going to be working if you isolate it and bring out a Cold War. So,
Yep.
Yeah, he was
Oh,
great.
sorry, Pamela.
I said he spoke really well, didn't he, George Osborne? I don't like the man, but he did speak well.
yeah,
Yeah.
he spoke very well, I thought. I thought all the people spoke very well, actually. You know?
Yeah, I thought Kevin Rudd's point about the fact, though, that China respects strength was quite an important one as well.
Yeah.
But you know, that's the way they're going to work. So if they're going to play hardball with you, you've got to kind of play hardball with them. Was kind of I think the message he was giving.
Yeah, yeah.
Although they've got the political and the economic muscle, which makes it a lot easier for them.
My grandkids are learning Mandarin at school, so they'll be all right.
Oh,
Yeah, well, that is one of the things one has to do, I think.
Yeah.
brilliant.
But you know, with technology coming in, I've got a little app where I can sort of speak to it in English, and out comes German, or French, or Spanish, and it's real time. So I can have a nice conversation with anybody who who's on that list of, and it's a Chinese product, by the way.
Okay.
And,
Of course.
My view is that I really don't want to buy anything that's Chinese if I'm aware of it, but I think that ship has sailed, hasn't it? Most things that we touch have got, you know, China's hands all over it, their fingerprints all over it.
well,
You know, anything
supply chains are very complex now. No single product is made in one country. It's a sort of a amalgamation of a number of countries' components that come together. Like when we produce a car, we have components coming from 15 countries all over Europe, or from all over the world.
With packaging, for example, you buy something in the UK and it comes in a bottle, and the bottles been bought by the supplier from China.
Yeah.
But just to point to what Ross was saying there, I don't know how true this is, but when there was the talk of lowering food standards for the American trade deal, chlorinated chicken, hormone-injected beef, etc. Yeah. I saw somewhere that there was a proposal that basically we then remove country of origin from food packaging, so that we do not know what the country of origin is. So going back to Roz, your point, actually, it's all very well as long as you know where it comes from.
Exactly.
If we choose to remove that, if the government removes that country of origin, then we have no indication what we're buying, and that can be either ethically because we choose not to buy from that country, or from a health perspective, whether we're buying stuff that actually is being produced under conditions that are going to be detrimental to us. And that's very dangerous.
Yeah, they should ban all that.
Sorry.
No, sorry, I was just going to say they should just ban all that stuff. You know, the cruelty to the animals, it's bad enough here. Battery chickens and battery pigs. But it should just be illegal. You know, we shouldn't have it in our shops. But they will bring it in.
I totally agree, Maureen, but we're going to bend over backwards to do a trade deal with the US, come hell or high water, because we're desperate.
Yeah.
So I have this terrible anger towards China because I really believe that they allowed it to come into the, Western Europe and throughout the world. If they hadn't allowed people in and out during Chinese New Year, okay, we would be in a very, very different place, like we were with SARS, where they contained it there, okay? And they purposely allowed it to get out. And my anger towards them, it knows no bounds.
You know, as far as the origin of products, even animal products, the technology is now sophisticated to be able to identify who the farmer is, who the processor is, who the wholesaler is. You know, the whole history of that product is somehow embedded in some way that you cannot change that. You know, so technology is going to make sure that even if you put the packaging out, one can, scan the product and be able to get that information out.
Oh, that's useful. I didn't know that. Like they can when they're trying to source where meat comes from, etc. Is that same type of thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we've got another 4 minutes. So if each one of you has a little comment to make.
Giselle's got a question. She's got her hand up.
Who?
You're muted, Giselle. You're muted.
Giselle, I haven't seen you. You're somewhere.
She's here. We could see.
Okay,
She's muted.
Go
Yes,
ahead.
Right. I wanted to just ask something which was raised this morning on Radio 4, but I didn't hear any discussion, if there was any. They were saying that since COVID has come, some companies have done tremendously well, like Zoom and some of these tech companies, and other companies have actually, hit the bottom and are going right down. And I wonder if we can. I didn't hear a discussion. Should there not be some way to share the profits, because this is going to be so uneven with a few companies with their profits going sky high? Should we not be helping these poorer, the ones who are doing so badly?
You're absolutely right. I think we need to have a global approach to this pandemic, and that is lacking at the moment because the type of leadership that we have is lacking, and there is no global leadership at all on this front.
Sharing the profits more.
Yeah, I think we need to have laws that, like for instance, Google pays its full share to Ireland and to UK and all that, because the business is being conducted here, and yet they pay a minuscule amount of money. So those laws need to be changed. I agree. There's got to be a lot of fairness in this world, and that's why we have Parliament. Parliament has got reports after reports after reports, and then shelves them. We saw that in the case of this commission that being appointed on racism, that they are going to, do it another. While there are about a dozen reports waiting for enactment to make the situation better, yet another commission has been. So this is a game that gets played, and we need to have fairer society, just society.
Shafeeq.
Yeah.
I mean, surely people should realise that this world is basically a prison camp. Like with various levels. It's like Dante's Inferno. Like we're in quite a comfortable level of hell, and there's other people in other worlds of hell. All this stuff about, like we're going to make the world better, and it's all going to be shared out. It's all pie in the sky, because there hasn't been one day on this planet, since we've had humans on this planet anyway, where there hasn't been someone with their back bent and someone with a stick standing over them. There's never been any golden age anywhere. So I think we have to realise how we're sleepwalking into this nightmare of technology, which will only benefit a small amount of people. Will only benefit all this surveillance which is put on people. Everything's going to be monitored. Everything. Why? I don't believe for a minute that this virus came from China. I'm not even sure that it's there. That there is a virus. I think there was an influenza which got very bad. I think the big problem is 5G. In Holborn, in Old Gloucester Street, everyone's saying how ill they feel there now, because they put in 5G all around the block down there, and people can't sleep at night. They're getting headaches. They're getting shortage of breaths. And these are people who are not into conspiracy stuff. It's the Bangladeshis community there. They're all complaining that in the last 2 months, everyone's getting ill.
Yeah, but it's something to do with magnetic, the magnetic thing.
Everyone's getting ill. And this is all a smoke screen. The whole thing's a smoke screen.
I think we talked about this at the last session we had about the dreams and the nightmares resulting from 5G.
Yes.
Personally, I believe it's a little bit of exaggeration.
Well, how come Belgium and Switzerland have banned 5G?
Well, 5G is a political game that's being played. It's a political game, and that technology is, 2 years ahead of the technologies corresponding ones here. And this is an argument that's going to play on until the local companies here catch up, and then that argument will disappear. So
will it be 6G then?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Or
That's safe.
But they're saying it's something to do with the magnetic thing that actually has an effect on people's cells because of the magnetic something or the other. I don't know. I'm not a doctor.
Isn't it radiation?
Yeah, but I just think your cells, oscillate or something at a higher frequency because of the 5G technology.
Yeah.
And I know that my nephews at the beginning of the pandemic, both of them, and they both live near Bushy, and they were both complaining, and lots of people, if you actually look up, were complaining of headaches, sickness, nausea. Okay,
Yes.
and problems breathing. But again, it could have been fear over the pandemic. You just don't know. It's like a
COVID virus.
exactly, or what do they call it? Psychosomatic. You just don't know, do you?
Okay, another 3 minutes, 2.5 minutes. I'm going to have to close this.
Really,
Maureen, go
No,
ahead.
just briefly. I mean, George, you're saying that you don't think there's really a COVID virus. There isn't a coronavirus.
that's
Me?
true.
Yes, yes,
Well,
yes.
what about all the virologists who are looking at the genome of the thing? I mean, there must be a virus.
Yeah,
There is
sorry.
There is a virus. It's just that he's saying I don't think that it's such a killer, but I
Well, I think you'll find
No, I'm saying it's influenza.
in all those intensive care units.
50,000 people, but we tell a different story.
Sorry?
No, I'm saying it's influenza. And
or SARS.
No, it's not a flu virus. It's a coronavirus.
I know. Right, I'll give you another one. I'll tell you something else. Right, last week, a friend of mine who's in the Conservative Party, we went to a dinner party with lots of Conservative mates and things like that. Right? And he shocked me when he came back. This woman, who was Boris Johnson's personal aide for 10 years, she told him she doesn't think that is Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson doesn't appear on television, doesn't do live things.
We don't think it's a clone.
Video. He said she worked with him for 10 years. She knows his mannerisms. She knows the way he moves, the way he talks.
Okay.
And listen, nothing is as it appears.
Yeah.
Nothing is in this world. Nothing is as it appears.
Do you think that he's changed because he had the virus?
I've got a note before I close.
Well, you don't know what's going on. I mean, it's like Winston Churchill. There was about 6 or 7 Winston Churchill. Because they had to keep them out of the way during the war. It's a fact.
George,
There was about 5 or 6 Stalins.
let's finish up by assuming.
Anyway, great conversation.
With this
Loved
conversation
it today, Sadiq. Thank you.
But for this class, we'll call it a day because the sun is still out. We can go for a walk and say goodbye at this point here. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone. See you
Bye,
next
everyone.
week. Bye.
Bye.